Do you want an hour of curiosities? Subscribe and let's begin. The name Xbox comes from DirectX because internally the idea was to make a DirectX box, a box designed to run games using Microsoft's graphics technology. Over time, that long name was shortened until it became simply Xbox. Easier to say and easier to sell as a brand. There were even different spelling variants floating around before the final name stuck. Some bees sleep by biting onto small twigs, so they do not fall, and that is not an exaggeration. Male solitary bees can hang from stems or twigs using their jaws, spending the night outdoors like a natural hook, so the wind does not knock them down. In many cases, they return to the same sleeping spot night after night, like having a favorite perch. Henry Barons was only about 2 feet 6 inches tall and still lived with style, which is why his story became one of those famous oddities of the last century. He was an artist and public figure of his time, known for appearing in newsreels and shows. And yes, that classic photo of him dancing with his cat at the door of his house exists and became iconic. The shortest national anthem is Japan's Kimigayo, and the reason is that its lyrics come from a very short and ancient waka poem. It is so brief that depending on how you count it, you get different numbers, but the idea is the same. It goes straight to the point. The funny contrast is the tiny text paired with a solemn and very slow performance. A restaurant projects its dishes in 3D onto the table so you can see the food before it arrives, usually using projection mapping. The most famous example is a show like Le Petit Chef, where a tiny animated chef appears cooking on your plate as if the table were a screen. The charm is mixing story, visuals, and the real dish so you feel like you are inside a movie while you eat. A painting hanging in a hallway was valued at millions because it turned out to be by Sima Bui. And the shocking part is that it was in a normal house like any other small picture. In the famous case, the artwork was estimated at millions before auction and ended up selling for far more. It is the kind of story that gives you chills, something historic hanging on a wall for years and nobody knew. How to One, a Chinese village, was abandoned and nature swallowed it, and it is usually known as How to Wan in the Shaanxi Islands area. And what makes it incredible is the look. Entire buildings covered in vegetation, as if green had eaten the walls. It became famous because it looks like a movie set, but it is real, which is why it attracts photographers and curious visitors. Mr. Blue Sky by ELO is often labeled as the happiest song, but that title usually comes from surveys or viral rankings rather than one definitive study. Still, it makes sense that people vote it that way because it is bright, fast, and leaves a sunny feeling in your head. It works like a good mood button, even if the happiest in the world depends on who measures it and how. Smoke the Grumpy Cat is a celebrity with an online shop and an Instagram account, and that kind of character works perfectly on social media. Sort of the permanently annoyed face becomes a brand because it looks like the cat is judging everything. The less he reacts to cute or ridiculous situations, the funnier it gets. The oldest pencil in the world is actually a lip pencil, and the wild part is that we are talking about ancient cosmetics, not a modern school pencil. These finds show that thousands of years ago, people were already mixing pigments with fats to create something like lipstick. So it was not just survival, but also aesthetics, identity, and ritual. Manchester created special lanes for people using their phones while walking. And the striking thing is that many times this was more of a publicity action or campaign than a permanent rule. The idea was to highlight a real problem: people bumping into each other while staring at screens. It works as an image because it looks like a joke, but they actually did it in a very busy area. The car designed by Homer Simpson was brought to real life, which is why it became one of those internet oddities that seems fake until you see it. Often these are replicas made by fans using old cars and copying the exaggerated look from the show. The best part is the joke itself. The design was absurd on purpose, and someone still said, "Yes, I will build it." A time lapse of a pepper plant over 115 days shows you something you never see fully in real life: growth in fast mode. You can see how it searches for light, how the stem changes, how flowers appear, and then the fruit. The visual hit comes when you realize it looks slow, but a lot is happening all the time, and your eyes just cannot register it. Jupiter has lunar eclipses very often because it has many moons and some orbit extremely fast. For example, Io goes around Jupiter in about 42.5 hours, which makes shadows and alignments happen again and again. Sometimes you can see chained events, like the system is an eclipse machine. George Harmony recreates movie sounds like those from Ratatouille using drums, voice, and everyday objects, which is basically the world of Foley. What is impressive is how simple it is. A bag, a piece of wood, a hit, and your brain translates it into kitchen noises, footsteps, or boiling sauce. Seeing the behind the scenes ruins the magic a bit. Look at this prophet from the 16th century whose cryptic predictions are still debated because the trick is ambiguity. In the typical case, like Nostradamus, the phrases are open enough that people can fit them to events after they happen. That is why there are two eternal camps. He predicted it versus it was interpreted afterward. Chong and Eng, the original Siamese twins, were born in what is now Thailand, and their fame caused the term Siamese to be used for a long time. Today, people usually prefer conjoined twins, but the historical nickname stuck because of their cultural impact. Their lives also show how entertainment and medicine worked in that century, with some very harsh things treated as spectacle. Jonathan the tortoise has been around for more than 186 years on the island of St. Helena and is considered the oldest known living land animal. What is impressive is not just the estimated age, but everything he has lived through in historical terms. He lives at Plantation House and is still a kind of local celebrity, like a legend with a shell. Your eyes get more exercise than your legs because they make an absurd number of movements every day to scan the world. Most of them are fast micro jumps rather than smooth motion, and your brain corrects them so you do not see everything shaking. Basically, you live with an automatic stabilizer in your head and never notice. Apps from the 1980s would have been very different if they had existed back then because hardware limitations ruled everything. Few colors, huge fonts, simple icons, and screens that did not forgive detail. Today we call it retro, but back then it was the best possible option with what existed. There is a robot called Prayer that writes and recites prayers autonomously, and it is usually presented as an art piece rather than a real religious replacement. The intention is to make you think, if a machine can generate prayers, which part of the ritual is faith and which part is form? Projects like the Prayer are described as reflections on modern spirituality using artificial intelligence and performance. Elephants seem enormous, but a blue whale's tongue weighs more than an elephant, and that fact breaks your sense of scale. You are not comparing big animal to big animal, but one body part to a whole animal. It is the best example of understanding that a blue whale is in a completely different league. Rumpology is the strange art of reading the butt like a crystal ball, and it is usually presented as a pseudoscience similar to palm reading, but in meme mode. The idea is to look at shapes, lines, and folds and draw conclusions about personality or the future, which is very questionable and mostly spectacle. The funny part is that some people actually offer it as a service, like a normal consultation. A Canada goose can have up to 25,000 feathers, and most of them are not the pretty outer ones, but down that works like a heavy winter jacket. That insulation is what lets them handle cold and icy water without much trouble. On top of that, they shed feathers regularly, like renewing their coat every season. The door of the Alcobaça monastery was said to be so narrow that it prevented monks from gaining weight. But this story usually circulates as a viral myth. And the most likely explanation is that the narrow door had practical architectural reasons, and later people added the moral tale about gluttony. It is one of those perfect legends, simple, funny, and easy to share. Obsidian, that volcanic rock, can be sharper than a surgical scalpel, which is why obsidian blades exist in very specific surgical contexts. The key is the microscopic edge, which can cut extremely cleanly, and there are studies comparing healing and tissue response versus steel. The problem is that it is also fragile, So it does not replace regular scalpels everywhere, but as a fact, it is wild. During dental cleanings, special dyes are sometimes used to detect plaque or invisible bacteria, and this is widely used for education. It stains the areas where you are brushing poorly, like a real-time error map. It is simple but very effective, because it stops being, "I think I brushed well," and becomes, "Look, right here, you did not." A plant in a bottle survived starting in 1960 with a last watering in 1972, and the impressive part is that it became a closed mini ecosystem. Water evaporates, condenses, falls back down, and the plant recycles what it can inside that tiny world. It is like watching a miniature version of the water cycle working on its own for decades. Seeing a solar eclipse from space is like watching magic in slow motion, because from above you can see the shadow racing across Earth. From the ground you experience the eclipse as a moment, but from space you see it as a massive phenomenon moving across continents. Same reality, totally different perspective. Even from Mount Everest you can see the entire Himalayas when the sky is clear, which feeds the myth of the roof of the world. The detail is that it does not always happen, because weather decides everything, so perfect views are a rare reward. When it happens, the horizon looks endless, like the earth stretched out. The Great Sphinx of Giza does have a tail, but it almost never appears in photos because most images only show the face in front. The statue is about 240 feet long from paws to tail, so the tail is a real part of the lion body. It exists, but it falls outside the typical frame. So many people do not know about it. Europa and Ganymede, moons of Jupiter, are estimated to have more water than Earth. With a twist, it is trapped under layers of ice. On Ganymede, there is talk of a buried ocean that could contain more water than all of Earth's surface water. And on Europa, there is thought to be a global ocean beneath the ice. It sounds like water equals life, but the challenge is huge because of cold, pressure, and chemistry. Real velociraptors were about the size of a turkey, but in Jurassic Park they were turned into large horror dinosaurs. Part of the confusion comes from movies mixing traits from larger relatives and adjusting them to be scary on screen. The result is that many people believe real velociraptors were huge, when in reality they were much smaller. Pareidolia is when your brain prefers to be wrong rather than miss a real face, which is why you find faces in outlets, clouds, stains, and even a bitten cookie. It is a pattern recognition shortcut. In low light or ambiguous shapes, your mind fills in the gaps. That is also why it works with very simple objects, because 2 dots and a line are enough for your brain to shout face. The first McDonald's of the empire opened on April 15, 1955, when Ray Kroc set up his restaurant in Des Plaines, Illinois. And the format already followed that logic of speed and repetition you recognize today. Wrapping and serving food in paper was not a small detail because it helped produce faster, keep things cleaner, and make food easy to take away. From day one, the idea was that the burger would always be the same, and the customer would not have to wait. That whole vermiform thing sounds like an internet nickname, but the famous candidate from more than 500 million years ago is Nectocaris, a Cambrian creature now interpreted as a very early relative of the lineage that ends in squids and octopuses. It was not a modern octopus, but the idea is already there. A soft body, tentacles, and a way of moving that feels like a proto-cephalopod. The wild part is that for years, nobody knew where to place it, until many more fossils appeared and the puzzle finally made sense. The ghost bird is usually the Po-2, and its trick looks straight out of a movie. It stays perfectly still, stretched out and pressed against a tree trunk like a broken branch. It even has that strange half-closed eye look that helps blur where the tree ends and the bird begins. During the day, it goes unnoticed, and at night it hunts insects, which is why people experience it like a forest spirit. Watching fruit rot in a time lapse is like seeing an entire city take over at high speed. First the shine fades, then spots appear, and suddenly the cottony mold shows up. At that point, it is not just ugly. Fungi, yeasts, and bacteria are eating sugars and breaking down tissues, which is why the fruit softens and collapses. The most hypnotic part is that mold does not really grow slowly. It explodes once humidity and food give the signal. When Venus transits in front of the sun, it is not an eclipse. It is a tiny black dot crossing the solar disk. What makes it incredible is how rare it is. They come in pairs separated by 8 years and then disappear for more than a century. The last one was in 2012, before that in 2004, and the next will not happen until 2117. Basically, a whole lifetime gap. For centuries, these transits helped refine measurements of the solar system, like the universe lending you a ruler for a few hours and then taking it away. Mosquito swarms give off zombie vibes, but many times what you are seeing is a mating gathering. Huge numbers of males group together in one spot and wait for females to arrive. They often form these clouds at dusk and around landmarks like edges, clearings, or visible features of the area. If there is a screen or net nearby, you see the swarm pressed against it, like a single giant creature pushing all at once. The story of Ann Hodges sounds made up, but it is one of the most cited cases. A woman who was actually hit by a meteorite, impact and all. And that is why her story always comes up when someone asks if a meteorite has ever hit a person. The surreal detail is that there is no epic crater, just a normal life interrupted by a rock from space. A wine bottle about 1,600 years old, the famous Speyer bottle, was sealed since Roman times and still contains a liquid inside, which is a historical mind blow. The trick is that it is not drinkable wine as we imagine it today. It likely has protective layers like oil and seals that prevented evaporation and contamination. The most impressive part is that it is not a myth. It is in a museum, like a time capsule screaming, "This was buried since the 4th century." John Brouwer-Minnick is the name that comes up when talking about the medical record for the heaviest person ever recorded. Mana, with peak estimates around 1,400 pounds, though measuring precisely was extremely difficult because of his condition. His case is not just a shock fact, it also shows how hard these situations are to treat when there is massive edema and serious heart and breathing problems. The saddest part is that even after losing a huge amount of weight with treatment, the body could rebound and gain again, like an endless fight. The idea of snails having ears is a bit of a trick. They do not have ears like we do, but they do have extremely sensitive tentacles they use to smell, touch, and orient themselves. Those tentacles move using muscles and internal pressure, which is why they look like living antennas that stretch, point, and snap back instantly when startled. So the effect feels like hearing. Maria, but they are really reading the world through vibration, chemistry, and contact. Pangaea was the supercontinent that brought almost all land together into a single mass. And when you look at it on a map, it hits you with that uncomfortable thought that everything far apart today used to be neighbors. Later it broke apart, and that split was not an explosion, but a slow unbuilding, plates separating, oceans opening, continents drifting away as if pushed with infinite patience. That is why fossils and rocks match on opposite sides of the Atlantic. They used to be attached. There are bees from the genus Osmia that build nests like works of art. They cut flower petals and use them to line or separate little chambers where they leave their young with food. That lining works as protection and also as a microclimate, a kind of cradle with soft walls that helps control humidity and insulation. The nicest part is that it is not an aesthetic whim. It is biological engineering using floral materials. Omphallophobia is the irrational fear of the belly button, and it can range from do not look at it to do not touch it, even as a joke. Sometimes it is disgust, sometimes anxiety, and many people experience it as a forbidden zone of the body, almost like it does not belong to them. Like other specific phobias, it can improve with therapy and gradual exposure. That clock at the Amsterdam airport that looks like it is being painted in real time is actually an art illusion. You swear there is someone inside drawing the hands, but it is really a carefully constructed video designed to feel live. The trick works because the camera angle and human gestures fool the brain into a sense of constant present time. That is what makes it great. A normal object turned into, how did they do this? Superman did not fly at first. He famously could leap tall buildings in a single bound, which defined his vibe as more athletic beast than rocket. Later, in the animated shorts of the 1940s, he was given flight because animating constant jumping looked strange and was harder to do. That idea spread to other versions, meaning his most iconic power became standard because of a practical animation decision, not lore magic. The story of Elon Musk programming his first game at 12 years old is one of those origin tales framed as genius or villain material. A kid writing code while others were trading cards. It is said the game was called Blaster and that he sold it for $500, which sounds small today, but at that age is more proof of obsession than business. The fun part is imagining him learning to code with a finish it and publish it mindset that early. The smallest international bridge in the world sounds like a joke, but it exists. It is so short you cross it in seconds and suddenly you are in another country. That is why it goes viral, because it breaks your mental scale of what a border should look like. On top of that, it often looks like a simple footbridge, as if someone said this is enough. Twinkie was a record-breaking balloon-popping dog, but the precise detail matters. The current record reached 100 balloons in 28.22 seconds, while earlier records were slower. Trisha like Twinkie's 39.08 seconds. That makes the story perfect for video. First the amazing dog, then someone comes along and makes it even more absurd, like the balloons are personal enemies. In Castaway, Tom Hanks went through a real physical transformation, which is why production was paused. They filmed part of the movie first, stopped, and resumed after he lost weight and changed his appearance, so the passage of time felt authentic. The pause was so long that the director used the same crew to film another movie during the break. The film literally has a year in the middle, and you can feel it because it is not makeup, it is real body in real time. School buses are yellow because the idea is that they scream here. I am even in fog, rain, or poor visibility. And that the contrast with dark lettering is easy to read. The color became standard, not for looks, but for safety and instant recognition. It is basically emergency branding, but applied to children. The line, "He is a friend from work" in Thor Ragnarok feels improvised because it actually was. It came from a Make-A-Wish kid visiting the set and ended up in the final movie. That is why the joke lands so well. It sounds like something anyone would say to defuse tension in the middle of a massive fight. It is one of those details that adds humanity to a blockbuster. That reddish albino-looking seal with blue eyes became famous because it is extremely rare, and that rarity is exactly why people worry. In social animals, looking different can mean rejection or being pushed out of the group. And on what we see as "wow, how beautiful" can be read by the colony as it does not fit. The story hits because it mixes cuteness with real risk, like an ugly duckling tale set in icy seas. The idea of a perfectly frozen bird sounds like a sudden cold snap, but the real version is even more impressive. A bird from the Ice Age was found preserved in permafrost for tens of thousands of years, so well kept it looked recent. It did not freeze yesterday. The ice protected it from decay for millennia, like a natural capsule. Because of that, scientists were able to analyze DNA and reconstruct part of its history. The glass-winged butterfly, Greta Otto, looks like a digital trick, but it is pure biology. It has fewer opaque scales in certain areas and also uses nanostructures that reduce reflections, like built-in anti-glare. So that helps it disappear in flight because it does not reflect light like a normal wing. It is literally camouflage through transparency, a flying jewel that becomes hard to track with your eyes. In 1924, human chess was played in Leningrad, and it was a spectacle. Giant pieces, people acting as the pieces, and thousands watching like it was a sport. The game lasted for hours, with moves announced so the human pieces could reposition themselves on the huge board, like tactical theater. What makes it beautiful is that chess, usually quiet and intimate, turned into a public square event. Pure Soviet showmanship. Monarch butterflies of the so-called fourth generation often called the Methuselah generation, live much longer because they enter a kind of biological pause. They eat, store energy, and do not reproduce right away. That is why they can survive for months and complete the Great Migration, as if their mission is to be the traveling generation of the year. While other generations live only weeks, this one can last half a year or more if conditions allow. Sand vipers are masters of camouflage. They bury themselves by moving as if they are swimming under the sand, leaving almost only their eyes and nostrils exposed. They wait perfectly still, and when prey passes by, they strike in a second. It is a perfect hunting trick and also a great way to avoid being seen by predators. Japan is pushing hard on the idea of flying cars, where electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles used as air taxis. There are already prototypes and test flights, and public plans aim for urban services within the next decade. Tokyo has presented plans to introduce air taxis by 2030, and companies like SkyDrive have shown prototypes in progress with commercial operation goals before that date. It is not science fiction, it is a project with a timeline and partners. The claim that the heart could shoot a jet of blood up to 10 yards is often repeated as a viral fact, but it depends on how you imagine it and on real fluid physics. Normal blood pressure is high, but a clean vertical jet usually does not reach that far in real conditions. Still, the idea helps explain something simple. The heart is a powerful pump, and a damaged artery can expel blood in strong pulsing bursts. Lucille Randon, also known as Sister André, was a French nun who became the oldest living person in the world and died at 118 years old. She lived through wars, epidemics, and massive changes across the 20th and 21st centuries, yet kept simple routines and a sense of humor. Her story became famous because she was literally a walking piece of history. A bear breaking into a house for a snack sounds like a joke, but it happens. Bears have an incredible sense of smell, and if they detect food or trash, they will try their luck. In many parts of North America, black bears approach residential areas when they find easy food sources. That is when the surreal moment happens, you at home, and nature ringing the doorbell uninvited. Seeing a wave from below is like staring at a living wall of water and light. The top becomes a folding curtain, and everything vibrates with bubbles. From that angle, you understand why a wave can be beautiful and dangerous at the same time. When it breaks, the world turns into foam in a second. Ancient Egyptians worshipped cats for several reasons, one key being Bastet, a goddess closely tied to home protection and care. In many periods, cats were so respected that they were mummified, and their image appears everywhere in art and amulets. There are also symbolic links to solar power through concepts like the Eye of Ra, sometimes associated with feline deities. There is a bizarre sport that feels like someone said, "I want to fight, but I also want to do tricks." It is called combat juggling. The idea mixes juggling with physical contact, balance, and strategy because it is not only about winning the clash, but also about keeping technique without losing control. It is like the circus and wrestling met on a street corner. The eyes you see on aspen trunks are usually scars. They are marks where branches or shoots used to be and the tree sealed them over time. That is why they look like repeated dark ovals, almost as if the tree were staring at you. Pareidolia does the rest, and once your brain sees a face, it cannot unsee it. In the 13th and 14th centuries, many people in Europe drew exotic animals they had never seen, based only on stories. That is why lions and elephants look dreamlike, with strange proportions and invented details. It was not simple ignorance. It was imagination working with incomplete information, like a medieval game of broken telephone. With a bombardier beetle basically has a tiny chemical cannon. It mixes substances in a chamber, triggers a hot reaction, and fires an irritating spray. Some descriptions say the reaction can get close to the boiling point of water. The result is a shot that hurts and scares predators, buying the beetle time to escape. Sea urchins really do wear hats, thanks to a behavior called covering behavior. They use their tube feet and spines to move pebbles, shells, and whatever they find onto their bodies. This can protect them from strong light, currents, or predators depending on the situation. If you give them a small human object, they sometimes use it too, because to them, it is just covering material. The story about a Giza statue in Poland having Wi-Fi is real. In Świebodzin, there was controversy after antennas were detected in the crown of the monument. The story went viral because it mixed religion, technology, and a strong who approved this vibe. According to reports, the installation was later ordered to be removed. The mammoth camera was a real beast. This famous camera from the early 20th century was so massive that it reportedly weighed hundreds of pounds and required a large crew to move and operate. It was built to capture enormous photographs on a single plate, basically a technological flex of its time. All that machinery existed to produce one gigantic image. Sewer covers with maps in Oklahoma are a brilliantly simple idea. Some covers are engraved with a small city map and a "You Are Here" marker to help with orientation. It is like an analog GPS that never runs out of battery and sits right under your feet. Once you know about it, you start looking at the ground like it is hiding secrets. A chimpanzee with alopecia can look shocking, but it also reveals something fur usually hides: raw muscle structure. Chimpanzees are incredibly strong for their size because their daily life involves climbing, pulling, fighting for territory, and moving like an athlete. When they lose hair, they can look like jungle bodybuilders. The steampunk-style clock robot that writes the time fits perfectly into the category of useless but hypnotic machines. It draws the time, erases it, and redraws it minute after minute. Many people know this idea from projects like Plot Clock, where time becomes a live drawing. You are literally watching the clock work instead of just reading numbers. When you compare Earth to Saturn's rings at scale, it really clicks. Our planet would be like a marble next to an enormous and incredibly thin ring. The rings are huge in diameter, but razor thin, like a floating sheet around a giant planet. That mix of massive and delicate is what makes them so hard to imagine. The Bailong elevator in Zhangjiajie is not a normal elevator. It is the tallest outdoor elevator by records, built against a cliff face, and it lifts you more than 1,000 feet in seconds. It is a brutal solution for a place where walking up would take forever. The ride itself is part of the spectacle because you are inside a glass box with the mountain all around you. A player without arms winning at table tennis using their mouth sounds impossible, but it is real. Some athletes hold the paddle with their mouth and control everything with body movement and reflexes. The most impressive part is not just that it works, but the mental precision required. Spin reading, timing, placement, everything. It is one of those moments where your brain says, this is video game level. The Catatumbo lightning is famous because that region of Venezuela has extremely frequent electrical storms, with seasons where lightning repeats night after night. It is studied as a very specific climate phenomenon tied to wind patterns, humidity, and local geography. That is why it feels like a natural show on a schedule. The deepest hole ever drilled, the Kola super deep borehole, reached more than 7.5 miles deep. The wild part is that this is still basically nothing compared to the size of Earth. That is why people use the onion comparison. If Earth had layers like an onion, that depth barely scratches the outer skin. It is like poking the shell and claiming you understand the inside. The idea of a rabbit and hare hybrid is a cute myth, but biologically it does not work. They are different species and in practice do not produce viable hybrids. Even though they look similar, they belong to different groups within lagomorphs with strong reproductive barriers. Their chromosomes simply do not line up to make a real baby. Some juvenile fish hide under jellyfish like they are umbrellas with tentacles. The jellyfish offers protection because many predators avoid getting close. This association has been observed in several species and is usually seen as an anti-predator strategy. For the fish, it is a mobile home, and for you, it looks like a science fiction scene underwater. Mimicry is one of those groups that melts your brain because they imitate Windows sounds, video games, and more, using only their voices with absurd precision. What starts as a joke turns into a showcase of extreme vocal control and group coordination. On top of that, it hits nostalgia, because one startup sound and your brain is back on old Windows. Retired pilots are often honored like heroes. There can be formations, salutes, applause, and sometimes rituals like a water salute when a special flight lands. It is a way of saying you closed a life in the sky with ceremony. For outsiders, it is emotional because you see aviation culture in full tribute mode. In Istanbul, a type of vertical turbine called Enlil made news because it is designed to capture air turbulence created by traffic and turn it into electricity. The idea is simple. If cars are already moving air all day, why not harvest some of that energy? It will not replace a power plant, but as an urban concept, it feels like a smart city hack. The first photograph of lightning in history is attributed to William Nicholson Jennings in 1882, when capturing a lightning strike was a technical nightmare. What is impressive is that more than a century later, it still has that "how did he do it" effect. It feels like the first screenshot of the sky in rage mode. Modern LED walls are like giant Lego sets. If a small section breaks, you often do not have to replace the entire panel, just the damaged module. That lowers costs, it speeds up repairs, and keeps massive screens running with minimal downtime. It is Tetris logic applied to stage and advertising technology. Goosebumps happen because we have tiny muscles in our skin called erector pili that pull on hair follicles. In animals with lots of fur, this helps them puff up to look bigger or conserve heat. But in humans, it is just a leftover reflex. That is why it triggers with cold or strong emotions, like your body pressing an ancient button. The photo of Daft Punk without helmets in 1993 is one of those before the myth moments, back when they were just two guys before becoming robotic icons. That is why the image hits so hard, it breaks the fantasy and reminds you that every legend starts in normal mode. Seeing it feels like opening a forbidden archive. Nauru is famous for having extremely high obesity rates, and many sources listed among the countries with the highest percentage of adults with obesity. It is a complex issue involving diet, economic change, ultra-processed foods, and lifestyle. The fact stands out because it is a very small country that reflects a global problem in an extreme form. Niagara Falls in winter can partially freeze and create massive ice walls and frozen mist that look otherworldly. The falls do not turn off. The water keeps flowing, but the cold builds giant ice formations around it. It is nature making art with below freezing temperatures. Software for self-driving cars works like a multitasking brain. It combines cameras, radar, sensors, and maps to detect traffic lights, pedestrians, cyclists, and other vehicles at the same time. And the wild part is that it does not just see, it predicts, because it has to guess what the environment will do in seconds. The real challenge is not driving, it is driving in an unpredictable world. Good medieval armor was far more flexible than most people think. A knight could walk, sit, mount a horse, and move without being a robot. The myth comes from heavy display armor or poorly fitted pieces, but combat armor was designed to work. In short, it was wearable engineering, not an immobile tin can. Brown beer bottles exist for a very practical reason. They protect beer from light, which can create the infamous skunky flavor in some beers. Amber glass blocks more of the radiation that triggers that reaction, which is why it became standard. It is not about looks, it is about defending flavor. And when lightning strikes a golf course or grassy field, it can leave burn marks and strange branching patterns. Electricity looks for paths to discharge and rapidly heats what it finds. Sometimes you see lines that look drawn into the ground, like the soil was tattooed for a second. It is the sky leaving a violent signature. There is a semi-aquatic lizard in Costa Rica, an anole, that can stay underwater using an air bubble trapped against its head, like a tiny reusable snorkel. The bubble helps it reuse oxygen for a short time and stay hidden from predators longer. It sounds like science fiction, but it is pure biology. The platypus glowing under UV light is real. Its fur can fluoresce with greenish or bluish tones. What makes it stranger is that you do not expect fluorescence in a mammal, since it is more often associated with insects or marine life. No one knows exactly why it does this, but as a fact, it is gold, an already weird animal that also glows. The story of the restaurant La Nueva Espuela and the Miss Pernil 2016 contest is the kind of surreal news that only works because it actually happened. A full event dedicated to awarding the best legs. It is a mix of local party, marketing, and accidental humor. When you tell it, people do not know whether to laugh or ask, wait, is this real? The first computer mouse began to be imagined in the early 1960s, and the first functional prototype was built in 1964. It was a wooden block with a single button and two perpendicular metal wheels, one measuring X movement and the other Y. It did not glide like modern mice. It literally read the table surface as coordinates. Clunky as it sounds, that idea permanently changed how we point and control screens. The lost remote control statistic is real and funny because of how specific it is. In a Logitech study, almost half were found between sofa cushions at 49%, and a small percentage ended up in absurd places like the refrigerator or freezer at 4%. It perfectly describes a universal scene of desperate searching and disbelief, only to find the remote buried like a domestic fossil. The red pirate flag was basically an ultimatum. It meant no quarter, with no promise of mercy if there was resistance. It was the equivalent of saying surrender now because if you fight, it will get ugly. It is sometimes contrasted with the black flag, which was already a strong threat. But the red one turned the intensity all the way up. F1 drivers sit almost lying down because every inch matters. Lowering the driver reduces the frontal area, hitting the air lowers the center of gravity, and allows tighter packaging inside the monocoque. On top of that, with brutal G-forces under braking and cornering, that position helps the body tolerate the load without losing fine control. It is not about comfort, it is about performance and survival. The long screw trick works for a simple reason. Many short screws only bite into the thin door frame, but a 3 to 4 inch screw can grab the structural wood behind it, the stud making the door much harder to kick in. It does not make your house impenetrable, but it massively increases resistance for very little money and effort. The blades of large wind turbines have already passed the 300-foot mark per blade, and that is visually wild. A single blade can be longer than a football field. The reason is pure physics. The larger the rotor, the more energy it can capture from the wind even at moderate speeds. When they spin, it feels like watching a giant creature moving slowly. Stick insects from the Phobias group are not just long, they are long-distance champions in insect form. Some reach over 12 inches in body length, and with legs stretched, they get to absurd sizes. The strangest part is the contrast. They look like lifeless dry twigs, but they are there breathing and walking like it is nothing. Many species can also live a surprisingly long time for an insect if conditions are right. The termite queen is the real final boss of longevity in social insects. She can live for decades while laying thousands of eggs, which breaks the usual idea that reproduction shortens life. Solid reports in large species show queens living more than 20 years, and some studies suggest extremely long reigns with special biological changes that let them last that long. The bones of many birds have air cavities, a feature called pneumatization. This helps keep the skeleton strong but lightweight, which is critical for flight efficiency. These are not fragile, hollow straws. They are designed to handle stress, and in many species, they connect to the respiratory air sac system. It is literal biological engineering. The first flower to bloom on the International Space Station was a zinnia grown in the veggie system. And the milestone was not just pretty, it was genuinely difficult. Flowering plants are much more demanding than leafy greens because of growth timing, humidity, fungus risk, and water control and microgravity. That moment was a small rehearsal for the bigger dream of real agriculture on long missions. The SpongeBob 40 holes thing is one of those beautiful internet obsessions. Fans have counted and mapped his pores like it was official anatomy. The joke is that in animation, the number changes depending on the shot, the gag, or the episode. The fact that people still sat down to count them tells you everything about the level of detail and fandom involved. Thomas Deininger works with perspective magic. From far away, you see a portrait or an animal that looks like a painting. When you get closer, you realize it is built piece by piece from trash and discarded objects. It is an optical trick with a message because it forces you to really look at what you usually ignore. The experience fully changes depending on your viewing angle. King penguin chicks look like an angry, fluffy toy because at that stage they are basically a ball of brown, down designed to insulate them from extreme cold. The furious kiwi look is not just meme material, it is survival. That coat keeps them alive before they develop the sleek adult plumage. In photos, they always look like they are judging you. A strawberry can have around 200 visible little seeds, and the wild part is that technically those seeds are urchins. Each dot is actually a tiny fruit with a seed inside. That makes strawberries weird. The red juicy part is not the typical fruit, but the fleshy base holding an army of tiny fruits. It is a factory of potential clones. Your body contains roughly 0.1 ounce of iron in total, which is why people say it would be enough to forge a small nail. Phosphorus is similar. We have several ounces of it, mostly in bones, which is where the popular comparison of thousands of match heads comes from. They are metaphors, but they help you feel that you are literally built from workshop materials. Color-changing tattoos that react to glucose, or pH, exist as a scientific concept in the form of special inks or skin biosensors. They are more research than street-ready fashion. The idea is simple and futuristic. Instead of pricking or measuring separately, your skin would warn you with color changes. There is still a long road ahead, but as a technological direction, it feels straight out of a movie. Sergeant Bill the Canadian Goat from the First World War became a legend because he was not just a mascot. He followed soldiers and, according to accounts, even saved a man by pushing him away just before an explosion. It is one of those cases where an animal slips into human history and becomes a symbol of companionship, chaos, and luck in the middle of horror. The USB drive campaign into North Korea is real, and it is basically information smuggling. Series news encyclopedias and outside world content are loaded onto flash drives to break isolation. What makes it powerful is that it is not new technology. It is a simple tool used as a political and cultural lever because a single folder of videos can change how someone sees the world. Jackie Chan also sings seriously. Since the 1980s, he has recorded music-performed theme songs for his movies and ended up with more than 20 albums between studio and compilation releases in multiple languages. It is the perfect plot twist. The guy who was already an actor, stuntman, comedian, and action icon also had a parallel pop career like it was nothing. The real police dog patrol in a parade always hits hard because it mixes military discipline with the awe factor. Trained dogs move in formation, obey tiny signals, and steal the show without saying a word. It always happens the same way. People forget the rest of the parade and remember the dog that walked like it knew it was on camera. The Eurasian eagle owl is so large and so predatory that when it accelerates to attack its silhouette and stare can feel more like a hawk than the classic postcard owl. It has striking orange eyes, massive talons, and a surprisingly powerful flight for its size. That is why its villain face feels very real when it switches into hunting mode. Origami in surgery is not just a pretty phrase. Folding paper is used as a precision exercise to train fine coordination, patience, and controlled movement, very similar to what is needed in minimally invasive surgery. On top of that, origami style, folding appears in medical devices and techniques that deploy inside the body like structures that unfold once they reach their destination. The blue side toward you if you are sick mask trick went viral, but it does not actually work that way. In typical surgical masks, the colored side faces outward and the white side inward because the design repels moisture and splashes on the outside and absorbs on the inside. What matters most is proper fit, keeping it dry and not touching the front. The claim that forgetting your wife's birthday is illegal in Samoa circulates as a spicy fact, but it is treated as an internet myth rather than an enforced law. It is the perfect kind of rumor. It sounds specific and cultural, so it sticks, but it does not hold up as a real rule when the origin is checked. Camels eat cactus because they have tough lips and mouths adapted to rough plants. They chew calmly, and their anatomy reduces damage from spines. They are not invincible, but they are far better equipped than we are for that prickly snack. While the southern viscacha looks sad because of its face and droopy eyes, but most of the time, it is just in full relaxation mode. It sits on high rocks, sunbathing, resting, and grooming calmly. It is diurnal lives in rocky areas and literally spends part of the day parked grooming and soaking up the sun like it is on a premium routine. Seeing crocodilians with their snouts sticking out when water freezes is a cold survival mode. They stay still, slow everything down, and keep a small breathing hole while the water turns icy. It looks like a frozen statue, but it is a real brumation strategy. Newton's tree is one of those strange symbols that still exists. At Woolsthorpe Manor, the apple tree linked to the famous story is preserved as a physical reminder of the questions that sparked ideas about gravity. And it did not change physics by itself, but it remains a symbol of how a simple observation can ignite a mental revolution. The pyramids did not always look worn down. They were once covered in smooth, light-colored limestone that could reflect sunlight and appear bright from far away. Over time, earthquakes, stone theft, and reuse stripped away that outer skin, leaving the step structure we recognize today. Apples float because inside they contain lots of tiny air pockets in the flesh, like a fine sponge. This lowers their average density compared to water. That is why a whole apple floats, but if you crush it or remove those air spaces, the behavior changes completely. Smart hair sounds like science fiction, but the real idea is simpler. Minerals like zinc and copper are linked to hair health and body processes, and deficiencies can affect hair loss or pigmentation. Visible shine depends much more on the cuticle damage and natural oils. Hair does not think, but it does reflect how your internal and external maintenance is doing. Some parts of the Harry Potter films had alternate versions for the UK and USA, mainly because of the Philosopher's Stone versus Sorcerer's Stone change. In certain scenes, different takes or re-recorded lines were used depending on the market. It is a tiny detail, but once you know it, you start hunting for it like a detective. The little arrow next to the fuel icon is the ultimate car life hack. That tiny triangle tells you which side the gas cap is on. It is basically a built-in GPS, so you do not stand at the pump having an existential crisis. What's Jupiter's great red spot is not a dolphin or a friendly shape. It is a gigantic storm, a massive swirling system on a gas giant planet. It looks like an eye, but it is pure alien weather. The wild part is that it has been observed for centuries and still keeps changing size and shape. Sea otters are premium tool users. They use rocks to crack open shells, and many keep a favorite stone tucked into a loose fold of skin under their arm like a secret pocket. That is why you see them floating on their backs, smashing shells and guarding their stone like it is a personal remote control. Furniture that moves by itself already exists in prototypes and products. Robotic systems like Ori slide walls and beds to turn a studio apartment into a different room in seconds. There are even modular robot projects that reconfigure into chairs or tables. The idea is a home that changes shape depending on what you need using buttons, voice, or gestures. The case of Bernadette Subarus is famous because her body was exhumed multiple times and became a topic of debate and devotion. A key detail often left out is that wax masks and coverings were used on the face and hands for display to hide normal deterioration. The no decomposition claim online is usually a simplified version of a much more technical story. The Hessdalen phenomenon is the kind that sticks with you because it is not just one video. It is an area where strange lights have been reported for decades, and projects have tried to measure them with instruments like cameras, radar, and sensors. There is still no single definitive explanation accepted by everyone, which is why the mystery survives. Flamingos aren't born pink. Their color comes from the carotenoids they consume when feeding on algae and crustaceans. Without this diet, they would be white or gray. In ancient Rome, urine was a valuable commodity. It was used as a detergent for washing clothes and even for whitening teeth. A tax was even levied on its public collection. Plants also communicate. Some emit chemicals to alert others of a threat, such as a pest. It's a surprisingly effective form of plant warning. In Iceland, there are no traditional surnames. Instead, they use the father's or mother's name followed by son or daughter. For example, if your father is John, you could be Johnson or John's daughter. Bombardier beetles can expel a scalding chemical jet from their abdomens as a defense. This mixture reaches temperatures of up to 212.9, a mini natural chemical explosion. Humans share about 98% of their DNA with chimpanzees, but we also share about 60% with bananas. Genetics never ceases to amaze. The Colosseum in Rome had a system of pulleys, trapdoors, and underground tunnels that allowed wild animals to be pulled from the ground, like ancient special effects. In South Korea, the number 4 is considered unlucky, so much so that in many buildings the 4th floor is marked F to avoid that number. This is due to its similarity to the word death. In Australia, there are more kangaroos than people. It is estimated that there are more than 50 million kangaroos compared to a human population of just over 27 million. Ants can survive inside a microwave. Their bodies are so small that electromagnetic fields often don't affect them directly unless they are in the center of the plate. In the 17th century, a British doctor proposed treating headaches by implanting a piece of a dead person's skull. Trepanation was seen as an almost magical remedy. In China, there is a glass bridge that makes even the bravest dizzy. It is located in Zhangjiajie and spans a canyon more than 984 feet deep. Goats can have regional accents. A study in England showed that the bleats of goats raised in different regions sound different, a rarity in the animal world. A man was found dead on the coast of Somerton, Australia, wearing an elegant suit but without documents. Among his belongings was a piece of paper with the phrase "tamam shud," Persian for finished. They also found a book with cryptic codes. To this day, no one has been able to decipher his identity or the cause of his death. Elephants not only remember, they also feel tenderness. Research shows that their brains react the same way humans do when they see babies. They feel empathy, compassion, and affection for other species. They are as large on the outside as they are sensitive on the inside. The brain weighs little but demands a lot. It barely represents 2% of the body but consumes about 20% of its energy. Keeping it active requires constant fuel, good food, better memory. A scent can break time. The Proust phenomenon explains how certain smells trigger forgotten memories. The sense of smell connects directly with the amygdala and hippocampus, without logical filters. A perfume or the smell of wet earth can open doors to the past. The organ that interprets pain doesn't feel it. The brain lacks receptors called nociceptors. Patients undergoing brain surgery can converse awake without any pain. The suffering center is immune to suffering. Looking at patterns with tiny holes can cause immediate discomfort. This reaction is called trypophobia. Honeycombs, seeds, or sponges can provoke involuntary repulsion, perhaps a primitive evolutionary protective mechanism. The tongue, a versatile and powerful muscle. It detects sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami flavors. It also guides food, mixes with saliva, and articulates words. Small but essential in everyday life. A car controlled with PlayStation. Sony and Honda created an electric vehicle called a Fila. Its steering wheel can be replaced with a PS5 controller. It includes sensors for autonomous driving and a surround display. Raynaud's syndrome freezes the fingers. Cold or stress causes spasms in arteries, reducing blood flow. The fingers turn white or blue due to lack of oxygen. When the episode passes, they regain color and mobility. HMS Britannic was Titanic's sister ship, but its tragedy happened in war. Converted into a hospital ship, it struck a mine near Greece in 1916 and sank in less than an hour. 30 people died, but more than 1,000 were rescued. Even so, it became known as the Forgotten Titanic because the iceberg story took all the attention. Violet Jessup is the definition of unbelievable. She was aboard Olympic during its collision, survived the Titanic, and later survived the sinking of Britannic as well. That earned her the nickname Unsinkable, even though it was really a brutal mix of working on those ships, historic bad luck, and absurd personal luck to come out alive from 3 maritime disasters. And that is it, folks. Do not forget to subscribe and hit like for more wild curiosities.